brand new box of 64 Crayolas. Then Uncle Ronnie said something. Just one sentence. That changed the way I'd been looking at one memory for more than 50 years. Something finally clicked. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at that little boy with judgment. I was looking at him with compassion. Hey, friends, welcome back to Hope Within Reach. I'm Steve Gramps Towler, and I am so glad you're here. Just a couple weeks ago, I found myself standing a short distance from the elementary school where so much of my story began. The school that's there today isn't the same building I attended. That one is gone. But standing there just a short distance from where it once stood brought everything flooding back. Not because of something that happened inside that classroom, but because of everything that happened after I walked through those doors as a 5-year-old. I wasn't there by myself. I was there with two lifelong friends. One of them, Kazi, has known my story since 1974. The other, Lar, has become a treasured friend over the years. Looking back now, I don't think this stop happened by accident. Lar was the one who invited me on the trip. Kazi was the one who quietly made sure this visit happened. Before we made our way to the school, we stopped to see my Uncle Ronnie in New Carlisle, Ohio. Later, as I stood outside the school, I realized something. I don't think Kazi was just showing me around. I think he was giving an old friend the chance to come home. And for that, I'll always be grateful. There are places in life that hold memories. Some make us smile. Some make us laugh. And some quietly remind us of chapters we'd almost forgotten. This was one of those places. Standing there, I wasn't just remembering what happened. I was beginning to understand it. And that made all the difference. That visit with Uncle Ronnie turned out to be far more meaningful than I ever expected. He's 82 years old now. As we stood together and talked, I found myself saying something I'd wanted to tell him for a very long time, and something I wish I could have told Aunt Joanne too. Thank you. When I was 5 years old, my Uncle Ronnie and my Aunt Joanne opened their home to me. And to think they did this around the age of 26 and early into their marriage. This was actually a very significant disruption in their lives. And they chose me anyway. They already had 2 boys of their own. I doubt they had any idea what they were signing up for. Life was already busy, already full, and then a hurting little boy walked through their front door. The truth is, they couldn't have known what life with me was going to look like. They didn't know how long I'd be there. They didn't know what I'd been carrying. They simply opened their home and made room for me. You know, something has happened over the years. Kathy and I have opened our own home to people. We've welcomed others into our lives. And because of those experiences, I finally understand something I couldn't have understood as a 5-year-old. When you're 5, you simply know someone gave you a bed to sleep in. When you're 61, you realize someone had to make room for that bed. They made room in their schedules. They made room in their routines. They made room in their finances. They made room in their family. Most of all, they made room in their lives. Standing there with Uncle Ronnie, looking him in the eyes, I realized this wasn't just another visit. It was a gift. Because not everyone gets the opportunity to thank someone who's made a positive impact on their life. I did. And I'll always be grateful for that. Then Uncle Ronnie said something. Just one sentence. That changed the way I'd been looking at one memory for more than 50 years. He looked at me and said, "Steve, all you ever wanted was to go back home with your dad." I don't think he realized how deeply those words would stay with me. But they did. Because in that moment, I wasn't hearing an excuse. I was hearing an explanation. And those are two very different things. After we left Uncle Ronnie's house, we drove over to the school. I had no idea that one sentence was about to help me understand a little 5-year-old boy who had been carrying something for more than half a century. Standing there outside that school, my mind drifted back more than 50 years. I could see it as clearly as if it had happened yesterday. I was sitting in my kindergarten classroom when all of a sudden, the other kids started gathering around one little boy, sitting in the front row. I was sitting in the back and didn't know what was happening. So I walked over to see. He had something I'd never seen before. Brand new box of 64 Crayolas. Do you remember those? The big box with the built-in sharpener? Back then, that was something special. I remember asking if I could hold them. He smiled and handed me the box. I remember being completely fascinated. I slowly looked through every color, one by one. I can still picture them, brand new, perfect, untouched. And then I picked up one crayon and broke it. I picked up another and broke that one too. Then another and another until every single crayon was broken. I've thought about that moment for more than 50 years. Not because someone punished me. Not because I got into trouble. By, but because I could never answer one question. Why? Why would a little boy do something like that? For years, I wondered if maybe I was just a bad kid. But standing outside that school, after hearing Uncle Ronnie's words, I realized something. Just a few weeks before that day in kindergarten, everything that little boy thought was normal had disappeared. My mom was gone. I didn't know if I would ever see her again. My sister and I had been sent to live with different relatives. And without either of us knowing it, we would never live together again. Nor would we ever see our mom. Suddenly, that little boy was carrying far more than a box of crayons. He was carrying confusion, loss, fear, and a longing to go home. When Uncle Ronnie looked at me and said, "Steve, all you ever wanted was to go back home with your dad," something finally clicked. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking at that little boy with judgment. I was looking at him with compassion. Please hear me. What I did was wrong. I'm not trying to excuse it. I wish I could go back and undo it. I can't. But I can finally understand it. And understanding was only the beginning. After we left the school, I couldn't stop thinking about what Uncle Ronnie had just told me. I must have replayed it 100 times in my mind. Because for more than 50 years, I'd looked at that memory through one lens: shame. I believed that little boy had done something terrible. And he had. Breaking those crayons was wrong. I've never tried to convince myself otherwise. But for the very first time, I asked a different question. Not, what did that little boy do? But what was that little boy carrying? I think it's an important question. Not just for my story, but maybe for all of us. There's a difference between an excuse and an explanation. An excuse tries to remove responsibility. An explanation helps us understand what was happening. Understanding doesn't make what I did right. It doesn't erase the consequences. It doesn't magically repair a broken box of crayons. But it does something else. It opens the door to compassion. And that's something I wish I'd learned years ago. Because I spent decades looking back at that 5-year-old boy through the eyes of judgment. It never once occurred to me that he was grieving, that he was confused, that he was desperately trying to make sense of a world that no longer felt safe. I don't know exactly why I broke those crayons, and I never will. But I do know this: that little boy had experienced more loss any 5-year-old should have to carry. When I stood outside that school, I realized something. I wasn't returning there to relive the pain. I was returning there to understand the child who had lived it. And somehow, understanding began to heal something. Shame never. There's one more thing I'd like to tell you. For more than 50 years, I've wished I could find that little boy. The one with the brand new box of 64 Crayolas. Not to explain what I did. Not to ask him to understand. Just to look him in the eyes and say, I'm sorry. I don't know who he is. I don't know where life has taken him. And chances are, he probably doesn't even remember me. I do. And somehow, I think saying those words would matter. Not only to him, but to me. One thing I've discovered while creating this podcast is that every time I tell one of these stories, honestly, it seems to bring a little more healing. To the 5-year-old boy I once was, I never expected that. When I first turned on a microphone, my hope was simply that one day my grandchildren would know their Gramps a little better. I never imagined that telling these stories would change me too. But they have. Maybe that's one of the gifts of sharing our stories. Sometimes we think we're helping someone else, but all along, God has quietly been doing some healing in us too. Before I let you go, I'd like to leave you with one question. Is there a memory you've been carrying for years? One you've only seen through the eyes of shame? That maybe today you could begin looking at through the eyes of understanding. You may not be able to change what happened. Neither can I. Maybe, just maybe, understanding can become the first step toward healing. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Thank you for allowing me to tell this story. And until next time, remember, hope is closer than you think.